I've had several requests on how I installed the retractable landing lights on my Freewing 80mm F86. So I'm going to give a quick overview on the steps I took to do it and the items I'm using. So let's get to it. First thing I did was find a F86 3 view that showed the lights underneath on the belly. The F86F has pretty close to the same panel lines as the model does, so using that as reference, I got the approximate size and the approximate placement just behind the intake lip. Alright, for the light bodies and the mounts, I used a 3/16 dowel about 1.5 inches long. I embedded 1/16 music wire into each end of the dowel to act as pivot points. Next, I used a washer big enough to get the outside diameter I was looking for to create the light bodies. Then traced the washer onto 1/8 inch balsa and cut them out. Again, using the washer, the inner hole was traced to give me the approximate placement for the light to fit into. After the pieces were completed, I filed a flat side to the dowel and then filed a notch in the balsa bodies. When happy with the spacing, I glued the bodies to the dowel. Using the washers again, I traced 025 styrene plastic to create the look of a light housing and drilled the center hole for the light to shine through. Again, using the washers, I traced clear plastic sheet to create the lens covers. I then used thick CA to glue the styrene sheet to the balsa bodies. For the clear lens, I placed the lens on the styrene, and while gently holding it down, I wicked thin CA between the clear and the white plastic. The balsa light bodies were of course hollowed out to allow a press fit of the LED light assemblies from the back side. They will be glued in place later, but up to this point they are just press fit. The next thing I did was create a plywood control arm out of 1/16 inch plywood and drilled a 1/16 hole on one end so it would fit over the hinge pin pivoting point of the light assembly, and glued it at about a 30-45 degree angle, so when the lights were in the fully down position, it would be back toward the servo, and it wasn't in a position that was straight in line to the servo. It was actually up a little bit, so it didn't have to try to get that initial movement to start moving up and over. It was already up, shown in the photo. The LED lights I used came from a Freewing L39 light kit. As you can see, the wire tabs on the Freewing lights stick straight out. I found you can bend them up against the light housing without breaking the tabs. This allows for a smaller unit, and it fits into the light bodies that you've made a lot better, allowing the light wires to come straight up and out the back side, and makes for a much cleaner installation. Okay, now that your housings are completed, let's move to the installation in the fuselage. On the bottom of the fuselage, there's about 1 inch of foam between the intake lip plastic and the nose gear door forward hinge support. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Underneath about 1/4 inch of foam where we're cutting, it actually has an open space built into the fuselage. So what I did is I ended up removing the foam underneath the light housings and the bar, and allowed access to that space underneath there. It sits below the intake contour of the foam in the bottom of the fuselage. Again, it's about maybe 3/4 of an inch deep, and about 1.5 inches wide. And it's just a nice little compartment there that works for putting the hinge supports in. For hinge pin supports, I use 3/32 plywood cut to fit the sidewalls of the hole we just opened up. Measure your light bar assembly and see how far down from the top edge of the plywood plate the hinge pin holes need to be drilled to allow your light assembly lights to sit flush with the bottom of the fuselage. Once you have that measurement, drill the holes in the plywood plates for the pins. Then test fit and test fit and test fit to make sure it all fits where you want it to. The next step is to install the servo that's going to actuate the lights. I used a 9-gram Freewing servo embedded in the sidewall of the nose gear wheel well. To connect the servos to the lights, I used a piece of throttle cable. On one end, a brass tube and a small 1/16 inch wire, bent 90 degrees, were soldered to that cable. The cable was then run back through its housing to the servo. In the servo, I used a easy connector to grab onto the cable. The end of the cable with the 90-degree bend is inserted through the control arm that you added to the light assembly. This is the only thing that you need to connect to this end. It seems to hold just fine, and using the side wall of the opening as a guide, it holds it in place without it falling out. At least it did on mine. So it'll probably take a little bit of tweaking to get it quite right, but that's why you haven't glued anything in permanently yet. This shows the original installation of my servo. I had to move it as the servo that was operating my gear door wasn't strong enough, so I had to replace it and only could get one that operated from the other direction. That servo operates through a gear door sequencer, and I can't use my radio to reverse it. So, from this video to the current installation, those servos were actually swapped. So my light servo now sits forward where this servo for the door is shown, and the gear door servo now sits back where the light servo is. So there's a lot less distance between my lights and the actuating servo for it now than it was before. Once I had everything working like I liked and everything seemed to test good, I went ahead and pulled the pieces out one last time and applied glue to everything and glued all the pieces and the lights, sidewalls, and everything back into position for one last time. Once it dried, I went ahead and double checked to make sure everything was working like it was supposed to. I then pressed in the lights for the last time, ran the wires through the cavity underneath it and up into the wheel well, and embedded those in the side of the wheel well walls as I brought the wires back and brought them up to the battery bay. In the forward part of the battery bay, I used a Freewing light controller. That light controller plugs into the Freewing gear door sequencer and is automatically turning on the lights when the gear switch is selected down. That seems to work fine, and I've had no problems with it. I do run the servo off its separate channel. That way I can control the direction of the servo, and I can directly control the endpoints on how far the lights move. Now that everything is operational, the lights are turning on and off like they should. I used a piece of 025 styrene plastic cut to fair in the opening that we created, and also to cut and trimmed to allow the lights to fit down flush. Once this is accomplished, that pretty much takes care of the installation of the lights. Just want to say thank you for all the positive feedback I've got on my lights. It was kind of a fun project. Thought it was something that they needed. And looks good when you're taxiing around, and when you turn on that final approach coming in for a landing, you see the lights out there in the distance. It definitely stands out from a lot of the other airplanes out there. So, again, enjoyed the project. Hope you liked it. Please share and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next time. Thank you.